With its long-range drone strikes, Ukraine has already succeeded in inflicting serious damage on Russia. A key target has been oil refineries, leaving Russia to deal with gasoline shortages as 40% of its refining capacity has been taken offline over the last couple of months. But the situation is about to worsen, significantly worse. Russia was already struggling enough to counter Ukraine's drones. Now, a new weapon has taken to the skies. Ukraine just launched the Flamingo Missile, and Russia was defenseless against it. We first got hints that the Flamingo has evolved from just a concept into a usable, combat-ready weapon from Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky. The Kyiv Post suggested on October 6th that recent long-range strikes against Russia by Ukraine haven't only involved drones. Missiles are also in the mix, according to Zelensky, which provides the strongest hint yet that Ukraine's Flamingo missiles are already flying into Russia. RBC Ukraine offered more context, noting Zelensky dropped these hints during a joint press conference with Dutch Prime Minister Dick Schoof. Referring to a recent series of social media videos, you can almost visualize Zelensky offering a knowing wink and nod to the assembled journalists in Kyiv when he stated, "Based on those hits, I think people can understand from the fragments on social media where drones are being used and where they are not. That latter part of the quote is the most significant." Even a brief mention of strikes inside Russia is almost confirmation that Ukraine is employing its missiles for these long-range attacks. What else does Ukraine possess that could perform a similar task? The Pentagon has been quietly blocking Western-made missiles, such as the ATACMS, as the Wall Street Journal reported in August. This block, which required Ukraine to seek approval from U.S. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth, may potentially have been lifted. But even if it has, Ukraine can't strike much beyond the border regions of Russia with its Western-made missiles. They simply lack the necessary range. The Flamingo, however, has it. Zelensky, though, chose not to elaborate after dropping his hint. No operational details were provided, meaning we can't definitively know the timing or location of the Flamingo's flight. There is one possible strike to consider, so keep watching to find out what that is. Zelensky, at least, had a solid reason for offering just a hint. Ukraine wants to deny Russia the chance to prepare for its tactics, whatever they may be. If the Flamingo is currently in use, Ukraine aims to ensure Russia cannot devise a countermeasure. Like deploying air defense systems to the types of targets Ukraine reveals it has hit. Ukraine has clearly learned from its past missteps. Back in 2023, Ukraine spent several months hyping up a counteroffensive meant to shatter Russia's lines and facilitate the recapture of most of its occupied territory. The combination of time between the planning and the execution, and Ukraine's openness about its intentions, allowed Russia to construct layered defenses that bogged Ukraine down in a quagmire. Some progress was achieved. However, Ukraine did not make the game-changing advances it had hoped for. A harsh lesson was learned in 2023. Ukraine must not let Russia get any advance knowledge of its plans. The Kyiv added that Zelensky did give a few numbers during the press conference. He reiterated a previous claim that roughly 60% of Ukraine's deep strikes on Russian territory are carried out by unmanned systems, some of which can travel over 930 miles to their targets. That leaves 40% of strikes unaccounted for. This provides even more fuel for the hypothesis of Flamingo usage. Building upon the hints from Zelensky, the Kyiv Post also contacted the Ukrainian General Staff to ask for confirmation of any reports concerning the use of Flamingo missiles against Russia. The outlet did not get the confirmation it sought. "No, we do not have such information at this time," the General Staff stated. They do have the information. But just like Zelensky, Ukraine's General Staff is avoiding any risk when it comes to disclosing information that Russia could exploit against Ukraine. As the idiom goes, loose lips sink ships, and flapping gums could thwart the Flamingo's flight. Still, Zelensky's words contain enough of a hint to suggest the Flamingo is active. And we might already know one location where Ukraine's powerful new missile has struck. In an October 5th report, The Economist claimed there are credible reports that the Flamingo has been used, possibly against Russia's oil refineries. In an article discussing the impact of 2 months of continuous long-range strikes on Russia's refining capacity, the outlet noted, there are also reports that FP-5 Flamingo cruise missiles have begun to be used. They are much faster than the drones, flying just 50 meters above the ground, with a range of over 3,000 kilometers and packing a huge punch thanks to a 1,150 kilograms warhead. That, by the way, is over a ton of firepower, demonstrating just how devastating the Flamingo would be upon impact. However, The Economist didn't specify a particular refinery strike. It only confirmed that the Flamingo is being deployed. Details of a more specific strike actually stem from an August Military report. For this strike, which may have been Ukraine's inaugural use of the Flamingo, a refinery was not the target in Ukraine's crosshairs. It was Crimea. The outlet claims a series of strikes against patrol boats and an FSS outpost on the occupied peninsula were not carried out using Neptune missiles, as initially thought. Instead, Ukraine had deployed Flamingo missiles in what Military dubbed a triple launch from the Ukrainian coast on August 30th. Those missiles took off sequentially, using solid fuel boosters before heading toward their targets. Satellite images of the FSS outpost, taken both before and after Ukraine's strike, also seem to confirm Ukraine used a weapon that hits much harder than its Neptune missiles. While the low resolution of the images prevents a full determination of the extent of the damage, what is visible is that the outpost's main building has been decimated. There is also fire damage evident in the surrounding area, suggesting an explosion that Ukraine's drones and the Neptune cannot create. We must emphasize that none of this is officially confirmed at this point. Ukraine certainly isn't going to confirm whether it has used Flamingo missiles to strike Crimea or any of Russia's oil refineries. Nevertheless, circumstantial evidence is starting to accumulate. Footage and photographs of strike aftermaths that hint at the use of a weapon more powerful than any previously deployed by Ukraine are circulating. And with Zelensky's hints about the social media footage and Ukraine using unmanned systems in only 60% of its strikes against Russia also being disseminated, there seems to be only one logical conclusion. The Flamingo is active, and it's hitting Russia hard. What we know about the Flamingo missile. This leads us to what we currently know about the Flamingo. As with the strikes themselves, Ukraine hasn't disclosed many details about the inner workings of its new missile. However, several sources have compiled information from Flamingo showcases at exhibitions and claims from Ukrainian sources, providing a good understanding of the missile's capabilities. We've already touched upon a few of its features. The Flamingo is believed to have a 3,000-kilometer range, which is about 1,864 miles. That range is sufficient to put almost every strategic target inside Russia, including the capital city of Moscow, within reach. The only areas the Flamingo cannot strike in Russia are in the Far East regions of the country, which are largely irrelevant to the war in Ukraine anyway. The missile also boasts a warhead that weighs over a ton. To provide context for the potential damage such a warhead could inflict, we can use the UN Safeguard tool to estimate the size of a Flamingo blast. Assuming a fully stocked warhead and a strike against a target 1,500 kilometers away, the Flamingo would explode with enough force to be immediately fatal to anyone within a 24-meter distance. That equates to about a 78-foot blast zone for direct human casualties, with those outside this range still facing risks of massive lung damage and perforated eardrums. Buildings fare even worse. Any houses or unarmored structures within 35 meters, about 114 feet, would be completely demolished by a Flamingo blast. Buildings can also be rendered uninhabitable over a distance more than 4 times the house destruction radius. The Flamingo truly packs a devastating punch. Furthermore, this estimate is for a strike against a target 1,500 kilometers away. Shorten the distance the Flamingo needs to travel, and it can inflict even greater damage, as the Safer Guard's tool demonstrates. Beyond its destructive capabilities and range, we also know that Ukraine utilized a blend of old and new technology to engineer the Flamingo. The Economist offered these details in its October 5th article, discussing what the Flamingo's manufacturers, Firepoint, used to create Ukraine's new weapon. To make the FP5 Firepoint uses repurposed Soviet-era turbofan engines, and its carbon fiber fuselage takes just 6 hours to produce, the outlet stated. Once again, Ukraine has figured out how to transform the old into something new and lethal. This approach is a far cry from how Russia uses Soviet-era technology. All the Kremlin seems capable of doing with its old weapons is sending them into Ukraine to be destroyed. It has reached a point where Russia is on the verge of depleting virtually all its stocks by 2026, as you can discover if you watch our video covering how Russia's war of attrition has backfired on the Kremlin. The name and comparisons to Western missiles. There is also the matter of the name. Flamingo is hardly the most intimidating name for such a powerful missile, but there's a reason for this moniker. According to the Kyiv Post, a minor manufacturing defect in the first batch of missiles resulted in them coming out pink. That batch was nicknamed the Flamingo, and the name has stuck ever since. If you prefer something more official, The Economist points out that the missile is also known as the FP5. A direct comparison to a Western missile must also be made. The closest Western equivalent to the Flamingo appears to be the U.S. Tomahawk. Ukraine's missile seems to hold several advantages over its American counterpart, starting with the cost. A Tomahawk missile can cost up to $2 million, depending on the block ordered. A Flamingo costs only a quarter of that, yet it delivers both a longer range and a heavier payload to its target. The trade-off, The Economist suggests, is that Tomahawk missiles are likely more precise and harder to shoot down than Flamingo missiles. But even then, the Flamingo has some tricks up its sleeve. We previously mentioned that the missile can fly as low as 50 meters above the ground, making it difficult for air defense radars to pick it up. Thanks to its high range, The Economist adds, the Flamingo could also change vectors multiple times en route to a target, which could also be sufficient to fool or evade air defense systems. Even if Ukraine's new missile is roughly equivalent to a U.S. Tomahawk, it signals a significant leap in Ukraine's long-range capability. Army Recognition added in its own article covering the Flamingo's first strike in Russia. Its combination of heavy payload, long reach, and simplified guidance design makes it a weapon optimized for high-impact strategic targets such as industrial plants, ammunition depots, and logistics centers far beyond the front line, Army Recognition stated. It also added the interesting detail that Ukraine may have used the Flamingo to strike targets in Belgorod, in addition to Crimea. But as with the Crimean strikes, there is no official confirmation from Ukraine. It seems almost certain that the Flamingo is ready for use, and that Ukraine is employing it for multiple strikes. What comes next, and the push for mass production? This leads us to the question of what happens next now that Ukraine's devastating new missile has entered the battlefield. One man believes the missile could be a game changer. Former CIA Director General David Petraeus, who had this to say in October. It's typical Ukrainian ingenuity where they've taken old Soviet bombs, put them explosives on the nose of a cruise missile they have designed with a jet engine and guidance system, Petraeus said. And that will be a game changer. I think if that can be produced in substantial numbers, that will have an enormous effect on the battlefield in the Russian Federation. And that's very, very important. The part about substantial numbers is critical here, as the Flamingo won't be of much use to Ukraine if it can only produce a handful. As is often the case, money will determine just how impactful the Flamingo can be against Russia. Zelensky understands this as well as anyone. Pravda reported on October 6th that Ukraine's president had dropped even more hints about Ukraine's potential, provided its Western partners are willing to keep opening their wallets. Ukraine's defense industry, which has increased by many times since the war began, has the capacity to reach $35 billion in production by 2026, Zelensky stated. Having capacity and actually hitting that number are two very different things, which is where help from the West becomes essential. That said, Ukraine is actively trying to raise as much money as possible from its own defense industry. In cases where it has a surplus of the weapons it's building, it is able to give its partners something in return for the cash they inject into Ukraine as defense industry. Agreements are already in place to open export-import platforms in Europe, the United States, and the Middle East. The task is to launch these platforms by the end of the year, Zelensky said. These platforms would ensure money keeps flowing into Ukraine's coffers, meaning it's no longer solely building for its own use. That would be massive for the Flamingo. It would mean Ukraine has the cash to spend on building more of the missiles it knows can cause major problems for Russia. Currently, Flamingo production could use a boost. The Kyiv Post noted that Firepoint had a production capacity of 1 missile per day earlier in 2025. However, it had set itself a goal of building 7 Flamingo missiles daily by October. Assuming Firepoint achieved that goal, Ukraine would have an annual influx of 2,555 missiles per year at a cost of approximately $1.27 billion. If more money comes in, those numbers could be dramatically increased to the point where Crimea, Russia's oil refineries, and almost any other target Ukraine selects could be wiped off the map. Assuming production is scaled up, the Flamingo has the potential to be a game-changer far beyond the war in Ukraine. Army recognition highlighted this, suggesting the Flamingo is unique in Europe. Long-range missiles developed on the continent, including the Storm Shadow in Germany's Taurus, have shorter ranges, more limited payloads, and come at a higher cost. Like the Tomahawk, these European missiles are likely more precise than the Flamingo. However, that won't be a major issue if Ukraine reaches the point where it can build Flamingo missiles in bulk. Ukraine's missile likely won't replace those that European countries are already building. However, it will offer an alternative that enables different types of strikes while giving Europe a chance to continue funding Ukraine and simultaneously building its collective stockpiles. Why does precision matter less? Because many Western nations are trying to make a shift towards something Forbes claimed was an urgent military necessity back in 2023, affordable mass. The outlet's senior contributor, Lauren Thompson, discussed the problem the West faces from the American perspective regarding sheer volume. America's military is credited with having the world's most advanced weapons, but because such weapons are costly, it is deficient in mass, Thompson said. Some experts believe that the current stock of long-range, precision-guided munitions would run low within weeks after a war with China commenced. West is seeking a new long-range weapon that combines quick manufacturing with simplified guidance and the reuse of old components to create affordable mass. The Flamingo fits this description, meaning there is a clear case for the West to practically throw money at Ukraine to get this missile into mass production. Russia is aware of all this. It knows that more Flamingo missiles would enable Ukraine not only to hit, but to absolutely devastate many of the country's most important military and military-adjacent facilities. And if Ukraine's constant strikes on Russian oil refining capacity demonstrate anything, it's that Russia has nowhere near the number of air defenses needed to guard some of its most critical domestic assets. Russia cannot allow Ukraine to reach the point where the Flamingo is being stockpiled by the thousands. So it's trying to nip Flamingo production in the bud. Russia's attempt to stop production on September 4th. TVP World reported that Russia had attempted to destroy a rumored Flamingo missile production facility as part of an overnight strike against the Ukrainian city of Kalush. That city was subjected to one of Russia's largest drone and missile strikes of the war. TVP World noted, with the main target being the Kalush Industrial Hub Park, where the Flamingo might have been built. Russia's strike was successful in that it set several of the buildings in that industrial park on fire. As for whether Russia managed to hit a Flamingo production facility, we simply don't know. Russia hasn't claimed to have done so, and Ukraine would likely not reveal it if it had. Still, this attempted strike proves that Russia knows just how dangerous the Flamingo is to its ambitions of subjugating Ukraine. When the Flamingo flies, Russia burns. And the Kremlin seems powerless to stop it, just as it was powerless to stop one of Ukraine's most impressive strikes on Russian territory yet.